Hello. First off, I'd like to acknowledge that Alexander College is on the ancestral territory of the Xolhelwet, Squamish, and Musqueam people. And I'd also like to express my appreciation for being able to live and work on these lands. I'm Dr. Christine Elsey, and I'm a professor emeritus in the School of Culture, Media, and Society at University of the Fraser Valley, where I've taught anthropology and sociology for over 30 years. I also teach here in anthropology at Alexander College. Today, I'd like to introduce knowledge keeper and elder and matriarch, Denise Douglas. I've known Denise for many years, and she used to be my former student at UFV. Denise is a member of Stalo Nation. She is from the community of Cheam, which is about an hour's drive east of Vancouver. Today, she's here to share with us her wisdom on indigenizing the Academy. And without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Denise Douglas.
Sorry, thank you, Christine. ACM Siaya, Xolhelwet Elder Talitzel to Xolhelwet talk to Cheam. Chet Chetama A. Xolhelwet Kusumuk Chet. Xolhelwet to Squalto Chet. Xolhelwet to Takwit Chet. Sa Tumuk to Equal Law. Xolhelwet is a name that I got traditionally from my people, and it means the woman who lifts up the people or who helps the people. And I'm Coast Salish, but I was raised in my home of Cheam. This is my land, and I give the greatest gratitude to the greatest of the creation. This is my land in common with my cousins in the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam, where I share fishing grounds with them. And I'm glad to be here and honored to be here on your fishing grounds to do this work that we're doing for all of our people and for all of Canadians, I say. I'm currently also the Indigenous Elder in Residence at the University of the Fraser Valley, as well as an alumni as a first baccalaureate in their adult education department. And the purpose of this film today is to convey to the learning public what indigenization of education is and the importance of indigenizing education in Canada. In my work with the educational institutions and the public, I've observed a salience in questions that arise about Indigenous peoples in the history of the settlement and the settlers in Canada. The main catalyst to the prevalent importance of the institutional indigenization began with recommendations that came out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, studying the impact of residential schools on many of my elders. But the smack in the face was the discovery of the remains of 215 unidentified children buried at the Kamloops Indian Residential School a couple of years ago. The three questions that become salient to me, but they're not limited to these, are: how could I pass my immigration test to Canada and not have known about the Indigenous history? Number two, how can these atrocities have gone on for so long in a society? And what kind of society can ignore them for so long? And number three, I live here and I've never met an Indigenous person, even though I see them in the malls and on the sidewalk and everywhere. And how can I meet them and how can I engage with them in a good way? So these are questions that come up quite often in different groups, different settings, different people. And in my mind, it jogged three or four questions, and one of the main ones was, what's the role of educators in the resolution of these problems, these social problems? How do educators help solve these problems? The other one is, how do we indigenize the educators, especially because some of them don't see any value in changing how they've been and how they teach. Another question is, what are some of the ways educators can assist in the social engagement of the Canadian society and their Indigenous contingent? The level of cross-cultural awareness in Canada is sorely deficient, and it shows in the salient questions that arise about the lack of formal Indigenous history and how our Canadian society functions, and the structure of the institutions that are channeling the learning public to behave in specific ways. I'll give the audience a few of my recommendations to transform learning in a way that's more accommodating to all the Canadian publics, including the Indigenous public, and recognizes the sui generis presence of the Indigenous people in our shared analytical spaces. My elders believe that the spider webs in a room hold all the snow-eath, all the floating words that floated through that room over the course of a year. And at the end of the year, these have to be removed because they pick up every word that goes by. Then the spiders weave new webs, and then they begin the cycle of Indigenous data collection that forms the discourse for the group for the next cycle of life. So this analogy I like to draw on to convey the image of what has to be done to begin the process of transformation and transforming in the learning spaces is that we have to actually remove some of the old discourse that was harmful to the Indigenous people. And the discourse of old that clung to the walls that created barriers to the Indigenous ways of knowing and the teaching and learning of the Indigenous public. We have to remove these before the Indigenous learners can even enter those spaces. The first step in the door must honor the presence and convey that we are still here. We're not trapped in a Shakespearean image of amusing chattel and free wealth and labor and whatever else they find in their fantasy. Since the creation of the value structure based on inequality, much harm has been done to the Indigenous society, including erasure of their participation in the building of a nation of settlers as we know it. We were always here. We were always innovative and strong, and we're still here. Some ways to incorporate this reality in our educational endeavors include, but again are not limited to, I think that it's really important that we reserve a seat in every governing board, at least one seat for the Indigenous leadership to fill, and that they do it in their own way. That in our institutions that we visually represent the Indigenous presence, and it has to be on the walls, in the branding, in the murals, and within the political structures, they have to be very, our political structures have to be very clear to the people that we still exist and we're still decision-making people. In our assemblies and in our gatherings, I think that they should be opened in a traditional way by our local chieftainships, and that the traditional environments like hearths, water, natural settings, where teaching and learning exchanges occur, that they can occur naturally, that there's no rigid linear divisions between the learners and their educators and their facilitators. We need to check out the local Indigenous learning groups in the region, and every learning institution has an Indigenous learning center now, and I think that we need to expand the role of those learning centers to start the public education of our guests, and we still do consider them guests in our land. We need to host workshops with our Indigenous people, starting with simple things like Bannock workshops, which I've offered, and I've found that they're very rewarding, because many of our cultures exchange bread and we break bread as a way to exchange a peace. And that's what it turned out to be in my Bannock workshop in the international group, is that it was something that was transcendental. It was a peace offering that we all understood. And then when we sat there, everybody just felt peaceful. And our people have teachings about how you go into work and about how you prepare your mind and your body and your spirit to do that work. And I shared those with them. And it's not just about making bread, because the Bannock making was a negative part of our history. It was a ration. But we became so good at it, and people really love it, and they synonymize us with it, that we use it now and we embrace it as a way to exchange our culture. And we make Bannock. Everybody does. It's kind of a pan-Indian thing now, but it was a cultural exchange. And it's an example of how the culture goes two ways. It's not just us dancing in the middle of the floor and showing you how our songs go, or what our drums look like, or how our faces look when we're painted, that we're actually exchanging a cultural thing. Because in my mind, really, culture is what we give our kids to make sure they live a safe life when we're gone. That's what I really believe culture is. And everybody has their own idea of what it is or what the purpose is. But I've checked it out, and I see that the reason I've kept things in my life is so that I can know that when I'm not there, my grandchildren have that thing to go out in the world with. So what individuals can do is they can go and they can actually go find band offices. You can Google it up actually, and you can find band offices. And you can go to cultural centers and you can just walk right in the doors. The doors are open. You can search out local Indigenous communities who are in the area and do the research yourself and find out who they are and find out, what that represents to you. Or you can just simply walk up. If you see an Indigenous person on the street, just walk up to them and tell them you've never met one before and that you want to, and reach out and introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about yourself, because that's exchange. So with that, I think that there's a lot more ways, and I think that it's only the start of a discussion. And I think educators in their own analytical spaces are going to be able to come up with many more ideas. One of the things, though, that I felt that I saw in engaging with UFB in Abbotsford just recently, I don't know if I said it, but I think that we should have an elder in residence, at least one in every institution, and that we should have them maybe living in the student residences where the international students are, because they have no family. And I found that when I went in there, they embraced me like their grandma. And so I think those are ways, is that we really treat everyone like they're an individual and that they're equal to us, and treat them like family. So that's what I have to offer. And I look forward to continued discussions on positive building in the future.
That's beautiful, Denise. And I just found it very moving that you open up your territory and make these invitations to settler people to come and share and to get to know your culture. That's just such a wonderful invitation. And thank you. It's beautiful.
Yes, thank you, Christine.
And I just want to thank you overall for your enlightening talk. And you've really given a lot. And Cookstem, thank you.
And I want to thank Alexander College for honoring my knowledge.
Yeah.
And
on behalf of Alexander College, Cookstem Kalp.
Yes, yeah.